Então, para resumir em português a ideia do blame game, se não tiver um direito ao consumo de maconha, etc., se não tiver um direito, então o Estado teria o direito de legislar uma proibição dessas coisas, porque ninguém tem um direito. Se não tiver um direito ao consumo, o Estado teria o direito a legislar uma proibição e, nesse caso, o capitão Nascimento teria razão que os consumidores levam a responsabilidade ou a culpa por tudo que acontece no meio dessa cena de drogas, inclusive as mortes que a polícia inflige aos traficantes. Eu acho que teria uma lógica. Por isso, a questão se ou não existe um direito do indivíduo ao consumo dessas drogas tem uma relevância enorme. Se não tem direito, o Estado pode fazer o que quiser com essa coisa e pode proibir. Se tiver um direito, então, quando tem um direito do cidadão ao consumo recreacional dessas drogas, então o Estado não teria o direito de proibir e seria a culpa do Estado. E isso é uma distinção, eu acho vital para os que morrem nesse contexto. Quem escreveu o livro mais profundo sobre a questão do direito ao consumo é o professor de filosofia norte-americano Douglas Husek, que escreveu o livro Drugs and Rights, que foi traduzido ao espanhol Drogas e Direitos, e já é de não sei de quando, mas é fundamental, é o melhor livro sobre o assunto que eu vi, eu estou pesquisando bastante nessa área. Então, é um conselho que eu dou para quem é jurista e gosta de pensar em questões de direitos subjetivos e as consequências e as bases filosóficas. Filosóficas. Tem a filosofia e a filosofia. E o que ele faz é a filosofia.
Você faz a gentileza de repetir o nome do autor?
O autor, Husek, H-U-S-A-K.
Obrigado.
Douglas. Also, I can call him Doug. All right, so that was this question about the blame game. Olha, então, eu diria que não são os consumidores que têm culpa, não são vocês, os estudantes. Nós, os consumidores. Por quê? Porque nós todos temos o direito de escolher o que nós fazemos com os nossos corpos e mentes de ponto final. Isso é básico na filosofia de direito liberal, que é a filosofia do esclarecimento. Então, eu diria, quem tem culpa não é nós, mas é quem fez essa legislação. E agora estamos na questão da legislação. Primeiro, a gente pode continuar a questão da culpa. Quem é o legislador? Aqui é a Assembleia, o Congresso, né? Talvez o Congresso, mas o Congresso foi eleito democraticamente, então talvez são os eleitores que são culpados, e os eleitores são nós novamente, numa capacidade diferente, não de consumidores, não de estudantes, mas de votantes. Isso é tristeza. do outro lado. Por que nós somos, como votantes, tão burros? Porque, então, não é a nossa culpa, porque são as mídias que mandam essas informações bem distorcidas e a gente fica pensando que vamos votar num partido que está a favor da guerra contra as drogas. Então, e as igrejas protestantes. Então, talvez não são os legisladores, não é o Congresso, talvez são as mídias, talvez os donos da mídia, não. Talvez sim, não, talvez não. Então fica complicado.
When you say that maybe it's the media or maybe it's the churches, I think I have a problem with that. It's because what we see, the problem that people have with drug usage and the concern society express, it's well established in reality by the fact that there is a huge amount of drug use and that the drug really does destroy a lot of people's lives. So I don't know, I just wanted to punctuate that. She was saying that I don't really like to think about it in this key of our personal right to use whatever we want with our bodies, because there is a social consequence for it. So I don't know, I just...
Yeah, very good. But on the other hand, sugar destroys a lot of lives. And as we have heard, obesity is one of the killers, and that is cholesterol and sugar and carbohydrates. They all are killers, but and alcohol are killers. But in spite of them killing us, and these things are killing all of us more or less, there is something that you cannot take away from people, that is their right to decide by themselves what they want to do with their lives. And one thing one does with one's life is to decide what kind of food I eat, and what kind of drinks I drink, and what kind of things I smoke, and what kind of things I take to change my state of mind. And all that, who should decide about all these questions if it's not myself? So how can you get around the question of subjective rights?
I guess it's a moral question about how long these rights go before you invade the
Somebody
rights.
else's.
Yes. So
Yeah, that's right.
it's an equilibrium, I guess. But
Yes.
I just wanted to call attention to the fact that maybe, I don't think it's your point, but maybe when you go through that argument, we can lead into a visage of society of like people are just their concerns are not important enough and shouldn't be taken into account.
Yeah. I also hope that's not my point. And so I think I can subscribe to what you're saying. And as a matter of fact, that's why when in the beginning I was trying to stress the fact that harm from drugs is real, and that there are different types of harms of drugs, and they are very serious, all of these types. And then I didn't go into questions which is really more, and I just confronted you with my belief that the war on drugs creates even more damage than the drugs themselves. But that was not to deny the fact that drugs themselves destroy a lot of lives and families and structures also.
Professor, linking to this, we have here the legal right to have cigarettes. Everybody can smoke cigarettes. it cause damages for the person and even for the family, because some people die because of this disease. So what do we do here in Brazil? For example, if I don't smoke, if I'm near someone that is smoking, I'm a pacific smoker, passive smoker.
Yeah.
So it causes damage for me as well, and it causes damage for the family that has to deal with the disease that this person can develop. So here we have some places that you are not allowed inside to smoke. You can go outside, and then if I don't want to be a passive smoker, I just go inside. And they have in the package pictures of the damage that cigarettes can cause. So this is maybe you're showing people and kind of educating and respecting both rights, my right and the smoker right, I think.
Yeah, and that is beautiful that you say that, because together with Luis Carlos Valois, I have written a little article that has not been published yet in a Brazilian handbook on drug addiction, and there we propose to treat other drugs like tobacco. So we balance the right of the individual and also the public health needs. And we think that the tobacco compromise is pretty good. And that would be a fantastic model for other things. Mutatis mutandis, because you don't have passive smoking when you inject, etc. But mutatis mutandis, that would be a perfect model, and we have been arguing for that. So now, let us just think about the question: if there was a majority in Congress in Brazil that said, yes, Karl Hart is right, and the consequence would be, of course, to get out of the prohibitionist legislation. So Karl Hart gave a big speech at the Congress in Brasilia and had chá with Temer. Chá bem forte, especialmente para o presidente. And then Temer says, yeah, okay, this is what we'll do. We will do away with prohibition. And then now come the legal limits to reform. What happens if the Brazilian Congress says, goodbye drug law, and we will do it like with cigarettes? Then you will publish it in the Diario Oficial, and it will enter in force. And what will happen then?
One of the problems that most scholars, constitutional scholars, says that it's not even possible to completely decriminalize the drugs, because there is in our constitution amendment that says you have to make it prohibited. You have to criminalize the drug traffic.
Yeah, good. I didn't know that.
So
that's true. There's an amendment.
That's the flexibility of it. How you write the Tatbestand, how you write the tipo penal, it's really flexible. It's really you can make it very in a very soft way or in a very hard way.
But you have
to have one.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So you have the level of ordinary legislation, but then you have constitutional law. Now you say, we want to do away with the drug law in Brazil. And then come the constitutional scholars and say, well, you can do a lot, but you cannot lift prohibition. That is not possible. So you have a problem of constitutional rights. And that's pretty bad. Okay, then you change the constitution maybe. That's a little more difficult. And then you have changed the constitution. You have taken away the amendment. All the evangelical diputados in Congreso are on vacation. And so you get a good majority. And now what happens? Everything goes smoothly, but
Excuse me, Professor, I think it is a matter of ideology. I don't know if it is the right term in English for the Marxist concept of ideology, like a false reality that is created by the way that we produce our life, that we produce the goods for living and this kind of thing, like street ideologia, in Portuguese ideologia. I think it is like the way things are, it creates in our heads like a concept of the reality.
Yeah.
Like we need the prison, we need this kind of things, so we can't live without some chaos or this kind of things.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is part of the social limits of reform, that the erroneous idea about the reality we're living in is one big blockade. But now I'm trying to get to the pure positivist legal argument. A positivist legal argument against reform is constitutional law. And now we are just imagining that somebody is able to take away the amendment to the Constitution, and so we have a free way to have our non-prohibitionist legislation. And my question is that okay, or is it legally still not okay? Is there still a legal limit to reform, even if the Constitution would allow it?
International treaties.
International treaties.
But the problem is that in our Constitution is in the Article 5, so it cannot be changed.
Oh, you have articles that you cannot change. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's another first step.
Oh, yeah. We also.
Okay. But the problem is, technically,
Yes. Yeah, good.
allegedly,
Well, no, thank you for that.
it cannot be changed.
Yeah, you're Lucas, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, we also have these articles. We have, I think it's 19 articles that cannot be changed in the German Constitution. On the other hand, over the last 200 years, we have had so many constitutions that could not be changed that is no problem. So if one has an article in the Constitution that cannot be changed, then you have to change the whole system, and we are changing it every 50 years. And so you will need a revolution. Then you take away Article 5 and write a new constitution. Your constitution is old. It's almost 30 years old.
It's old enough.
Yeah, every 30 years one should have a chance for a new constitution. Okay, so you cannot change it, but you will have a revolution, and then you will have a new constitution without Article 5. You will have Article 4 and then Article 6. and then you have the international conventions. You have the international treaties. And now we get into real problematic matters, because the international treaties, which are these treaties? Well, there are hundreds of them concerning drugs, but they wanted to make just one treaty. They wanted to take together all the treaties because nobody knew anymore what was going on. So in 1961, they had a treaty that they called the Single Convention, only a single treaty, to put everything in one. So the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs of 1961. Then we have suddenly one thought, oh no, we need another convention, another. So then in 1971, there was the Convention of Psychotropic Drugs, and then in 1988 there was the Vienna Convention on a lot of things, and especially money laundering and drug trafficking, and that was one of the toughest ones. So basically we have three international treaties: the Single Convention, the Convention on Psychotropic Drugs, and the Vienna Convention. And behind the Single Convention are all the earlier conventions. Which was the first convention that was integrated in the Single Convention? That was the Opium Convention of 1912 of The Hague. And then come two further international drug convention of Geneva, Convention 1 Geneva and Geneva 2, both in 1925. And then come other conventions, and then comes the 1931 convention on the prohibition of the cultivation and the reduction of the distribution of drugs, narcotic drugs. And then in 1934, etc., 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 we have a lot of more conventions. They were all taken together in the single convention, 61, then psychotropic, LSD, etc., 71, Vienna, 88. Okay, we have all these conventions. And these conventions say you have to prohibit these drugs. Then there are the schedules. There are drugs that are most terrible, then there are drugs that are a little less but still terribly terrible, and then there are drugs that are a little bit less terrible. So they're all controlled substances, but they're in different regimes. And there are provisions that you have to use the criminal law. Of course, theoretically, you could prohibit these drugs and only have administrative fines. But the convention makers, they are not stupid. And they say, no, you have to make it a criminal offense. So there's an obligation for all the countries, signatories of these conventions, to make it a criminal offense. Also possession. Now, who are these signatories? Signatories are practically all countries of the world. Why are practically all countries of the world signatory? Because if you're not, then you will be excluded from the international trade in remedies and all sorts of legitimate drugs, also essential drugs for heart diseases, lung diseases, etc. And we all know how much everybody in this world depends on these kind of things. So if you say you don't want to be part of the International Drug Convention, then they say, yeah, okay, but then you can close your pharmacies because you can produce your own drugs in Ecuador or in Zambia, but nobody can do that. So there's a de facto obligation to sign these treaties. Also, no country can enter the European Union as a member of the European Union without signing all these drug conventions. The European Union said that. Why did the European Union state that? Because the Americans said, why don't you put that in the treaty? So practically every country, except North Korea, for instance, is part of these international conventions. These conventions, they are not self-executing. There are some conventions that are self-executing. There are others that have to be ratified and transported in national legislation. But this is an obligation. And what Germany has is a transportation of international convention law into national law. And they call it the German drug law. And what Brazil has is a transportation of the international obligation into Brazilian law. They call it the Brazilian drug law of 1986, of 2006. And it's always only a response to international obligations. You can say, we take the death penalty in, we take it out, etc. You're free, but you're not free about the question which drugs are forbidden, that you have to use criminal law, and that you have to do everything that the international drug control bodies tell you to do. Because there's a police, there's an American police, the Drug Enforcement Agency, there's a United Nations quasi-police, the International Narcotics Control Board, that used to be called in the 1920s, when it was founded, it was called the Central Opium Committee. That was the time when the communist parties were still very much on vogue, and you had central committees for everything. So they had a Comité Central for that question. Now it's called the International Narcotics Control Board. And you have the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs, that is above the International Narcotics Control Board, and above the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, made up of 53 states and their representatives, you have the Social and Economic Council of the United Nations, and of course the General Assembly and the Security Council. So the whole thing of the International Drug Convention has been integrated into the body of the United Nations, but it is much older than the United Nations. It has already been in existence at the time of the League of Nations, 1919 to 1934, more or less. So the drug control system is older than the United Nations, much older. It already has been part of the League of Nations, and it was already in existence before the League of Nations, since 1912. That was before the First World War. And it really only functioned after the First World War, when the Axis powers like Germany and Turkey were forced to sign it. They didn't want to sign it. But they lost the war, and in Article 295 of the Versailles Peace Treaty, there was, well, we will continue this war if you don't sign the Opium Convention within 12 months. And it took 11 months and 2 weeks, and Germany had its first anti-drug law, which was, of course, a true copy of the Hague Convention of 1912. So it was really not the Brazilian Congress that made the Brazilian law, and it was not the German Congress that made the German law. It's always only the transportation of the actual state of international conventions that is being obliged to be transported into national law. It looks like national legislation, and it has little differences, of course, but basically the basic structure and content is not national, it is global.